Dr. Covington's polished leather shoe cut through the chandelier-lit air like a dagger. 1 second, Jade was standing beside the table with her order pad resting in her apron pocket, and the next her body twisted as the millionaire's foot slammed toward her ribs. Every socialite and executive watching thought the powerless waitress was finished. They thought Covington finally proved he could treat anyone however he wanted, but what nobody expected was the lightning-fast blur that met the attack. Jade shifted the tiniest bit, her eyes tracking the movement before it fully extended, and her forearm became granite as it connected with his shin. The whole dining room froze. Even Dr. Covington's breath caught. Something didn't make sense. Something felt wrong about the woman everyone assumed was defenseless, and in that single unreal moment, the entire elite crowd realized they had been judging the wrong person all evening without knowing it was all leading to this exact second. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Now, let's jump right back in. When the evening actually began, the Grand Imperial dining room looked flawless. Nothing tense, nothing hostile, just the usual rhythm of clinking crystal, soft classical music, and the murmur of wealthy conversations. Jade stepped through the service entrance with her order pad secured in her apron, her movements smooth and professional. She didn't rush, didn't hesitate, didn't look uncertain. She simply listened and served. A couple of diners near table 12 whispered to each other. One said, "She's one of their best servers here." The other replied, "She moves like she's been doing this for years." Jade continued her rounds without reacting to anything being said around her. Across the room, Dr. Barrett Chase Covington sat at the head of table 7 with his arms spread wide, commanding attention. The moment he noticed Jade approaching another table, his expression shifted. One of his dinner companions asked, "Something wrong, Barrett?" Covington muttered, "I don't like how she carries herself like she belongs here." His companion frowned and said, "She's just doing her job, man." The Grand Imperial wasn't just expensive. It was a statement. Triple-height ceilings held massive crystal chandeliers that cascaded light across every surface like liquid gold. The walls featured hand-carved mahogany paneling, imported from somewhere most people couldn't pronounce, and the floor was Italian marble so polished you could see your reflection if you looked down long enough. White linen tablecloths draped over each table with the kind of precision that suggested someone ironed them within the last hour. The silverware gleamed. The china bore the restaurant's gold-embossed crest. Even the air felt expensive, carrying the faint scent of aged wine, truffle oil, and wealth that didn't need to announce itself because everyone already knew. Dr. Covington fit perfectly into that atmosphere. His navy blue suit was custom-tailored, cut so precisely that every line emphasized his frame without a single wrinkle. His salt and pepper hair was slicked back in a way that screamed meticulous grooming, and his short beard was trimmed to the millimeter. The luxury watch on his left wrist caught the light every time he gestured, which he did often and deliberately. He wasn't just dining. He was performing. Table 7 had become his stage for the evening. 6 investors sat around him, hanging on his words as he recounted a story about a procedure he performed on some actress whose name he dropped casually. "She walked into my office looking like she'd been in a car accident," he said, leaning back with the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. 3 hours later, she walked out looking 10 years younger. That's what I do. I don't just fix faces. I rebuild legacies. The investors laughed right on cue. One of them, a balding man in his 50s wearing wire-rimmed glasses, raised his wine glass. "That's why we're here, Barrett. You're not just a surgeon. You're an artist." Covington accepted the compliment with a nod that suggested he heard variations of it so often it barely registered anymore. "Art requires vision," he replied, "and vision requires knowing exactly what people need before they even ask for it." Another investor, a younger woman in a black cocktail dress, leaned forward slightly. "How many procedures do you perform in a week?" Covington swirled his wine glass. "Depends on the week. But I'm selective. I don't take just anyone. My clientele includes people you've seen on magazine covers, people who run companies you've invested in, people who understand that perfection isn't cheap." A waiter approached the table quietly, refilling water glasses without interrupting the conversation. Covington didn't acknowledge him. He kept talking, his voice carrying just far enough that nearby tables could hear pieces of his monologue. "The waiting list for my services is 6 months long. 6 months. And people still call every single day begging for an earlier slot." He paused, letting that sink in. "That's the difference between being good and being legendary." The investors nodded, impressed, or at least performing the right level of admiration. Covington thrived on it. He gestured toward the restaurant around them. "This place gets it. They understand that certain people deserve a certain level of treatment. That's why I bring my business partners here. Atmosphere matters. Presentation matters. Excellence recognizes excellence." Jade reached the section where Dr. Covington's table sat. She was preparing to check on their wine order when Covington raised his voice deliberately, snapping his fingers. "You, over here, now!" The words weren't a request. Jade turned calmly and approached. "Yes, sir. How can I help you?" Her voice wasn't defensive, apologetic, or nervous. It was professional in a way that somehow irritated Covington more than anything else. He leaned back in his chair and said loudly, "This wine is completely wrong. Did you even check what we ordered?" Jade glanced at the bottle. "That's the 2015 Bordeaux you requested, sir. Would you like me to—" "Don't tell me what I ordered," Covington interrupted, his voice rising. Another diner at a nearby table muttered, "Come on, Barrett, relax." Covington ignored him completely. "Just fix it, and be quick about it." Jade nodded once. "I'll speak with the sommelier immediately." She turned to leave with the same steady grace. But Covington kept staring at her long after she walked away, his jaw tightening as if her simple, composed response bothered him on a level he couldn't even explain. The conversation at table 7 continued, but something had shifted. Covington's attention divided between his investors and the service around him. He made comments between stories, small criticisms, the temperature of the room, the spacing between courses, the way another server moved past too slowly. His dinner companions exchanged glances but said nothing. This was his evening, his territory, and they were there to impress him, not the other way around. Jade moved through the service corridor with the same measured rhythm, completely unaware that Covington's irritation wasn't fading. It was growing into something that would explode later, long before anyone had time to stop it. 20 minutes passed with that quiet elegance the Grand Imperial was known for, the kind of refined atmosphere that makes it easy to forget anything hostile is brewing. Jade returned to table 7 with the sommelier, who carefully explained the wine selection. Dr. Covington waved him off dismissively and pointed at Jade. "She's the one who got it wrong in the first place." The sommelier glanced at Jade, then back at Covington. "Sir, I assure you the order was—" "I don't need assurances from staff," Covington cut in, his voice sharp enough that several nearby tables went quiet. Jade kept her hands folded, her posture professional, listening without visible reaction. Covington leaned forward, his face flushing. "You people think you can just go through the motions and collect tips from your betters." One of his dinner guests shifted uncomfortably. "Barrett, that's—" Covington didn't let him finish. He stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the marble floor, and stepped closer to Jade. "Do you even understand who you're serving?" Jade met his eyes calmly. "I understand you're a valued guest, sir." That response, perfectly measured, completely unshaken, made something snap behind Covington's eyes. He took another step forward, invading her space, and the entire dining room seemed to hold its breath as phones slowly lifted, recording what everyone sensed was about to become unforgettable. The silence stretched for 3 seconds that felt like 30. Covington's dinner guests sat frozen, unsure whether to intervene or pretend they weren't witnessing what was clearly becoming a scene. The female investor in the black dress opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it again when Covington's glare swept past her. Jade remained perfectly still, her hands still folded in front of her apron, her expression neutral. She didn't step back. She didn't flinch. She simply waited, giving Covington the space to either collect himself or commit fully to whatever direction this was heading. That patience, that refusal to react, seemed to make everything worse. "Valued guest," Covington repeated slowly, his voice dripping with contempt. "Is that what they teach you to say? Some script they make you memorize so you can pretend you belong in a place like this?" He gestured around the dining room with one hand, his movements sharp and theatrical. "Do you even understand what this room represents? What it costs to sit at these tables?" Jade kept her voice level. "The Grand Imperial prides itself on treating every guest with respect, sir." "Respect?" Covington laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think serving wine is respect? You think walking around with your little apron and your order pad means you understand anything about the people in this room?" He took another half-step closer, close enough that Jade could smell the expensive cologne mixed with the wine on his breath. "Let me explain something to you. The watch on my wrist costs more than you make in a year. The suit I'm wearing, custom-made in Milan. The wine you somehow managed to screw up. That bottle alone is worth more than your entire wardrobe." One of the investors, the older man with wire-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat softly. "Barrett, maybe we should just—" "I'm making a point, Gerald," Covington snapped without looking at him. His eyes stayed locked on Jade. "She needs to understand her place. They all do." He waved his hand vaguely toward the other servers moving through the dining room, most of whom had slowed their pace, aware that something was happening at table 7, but unsure whether to approach or stay clear. Jade's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but her voice remained steady. "I apologize if there was any confusion with your order, sir. I can have the manager come speak with you directly if you'd prefer." "Oh, now you want to pass me off to someone else?" Covington's face flushed darker. "That's perfect. That's exactly what I'd expect from someone like you. Make a mistake, then run and hide behind someone else to clean it up." He turned slightly toward his dinner guests, as if performing for them now. "This is what happens when places start lowering their standards. They hire anyone who can carry a tray and smile, and they expect us to just accept mediocrity." The female investor shifted uncomfortably. "I really don't think this is necessary." "It absolutely is necessary," Covington cut her off. "I come to this restaurant because it's supposed to represent excellence. I bring my associates here because I expect a certain level of professionalism. And instead, I get someone who can't even get a simple wine order right, and then has the nerve to stand here and lecture me about what I requested." Jade's posture hadn't changed. Her hands remained folded. Her expression stayed neutral. But something in her eyes had shifted, a flicker of calculation that would have warned anyone paying close enough attention. "I brought the 2015 Bordeaux that was listed on your reservation, sir. If you'd prefer a different selection, I'm happy to—" "Stop," Covington said, his voice dropping lower but somehow carrying more weight. "Just stop talking. Every word out of your mouth makes this worse." He leaned in slightly, his voice taking on a tone that made several nearby diners openly turn to watch. You people always have an excuse, don't you? Always have some explanation for why it's not your fault. Always trying to turn it around like somehow we're the problem for expecting basic competence. The phrase, "you people," hung in the air like smoke. Several diners exchanged glances. A woman at table 9 whispered something to her companion. A man in a gray suit 2 tables over pulled out his phone and angled it toward the confrontation, not even trying to be subtle about recording anymore. Jade took a slow breath through her nose. "Sir, I understand you're frustrated. If there's been a miscommunication about your order, I take full responsibility and I'm trying to correct it. That's all I'm attempting to do here." "Full responsibility," Covington repeated mockingly. "How generous of you. How noble." He straightened up slightly, looking down at her from his full height. "Let me tell you what responsibility actually looks like. Responsibility is what I have every single day when someone's face is under my scalpel. Responsibility is making decisions that affect people's entire lives. Responsibility is building something worth millions through actual skill and intelligence." He jabbed a finger toward her, not quite touching, but close enough to make his point. "What you do, walking around taking orders and pouring drinks, that's not responsibility. That's barely even a job. It's something anyone could do. It requires nothing." The sommelier, who had been standing a few feet away looking increasingly distressed, finally found his voice. "Dr. Covington, please, I can personally verify that the wine selection—" "I don't care what you can verify," Covington said, without even glancing at him. His focus stayed entirely on Jade, his anger seeming to feed on her continued composure. "I care that I'm sitting here with important people, having an important dinner, and instead of excellence, I'm getting excuses from someone who clearly doesn't understand the first thing about service." Jade's hands tightened slightly where they were folded, the only visible sign that his words were landing anywhere. "I apologize that your experience hasn't met your expectations tonight, sir." "My expectations?" Covington's laugh was harsh. "My expectations are that when I spend thousands of dollars at an establishment like this, the people serving me know their place and do their jobs without making me waste my valuable time correcting their mistakes." He straightened his cufflinks with deliberate slowness, a gesture designed to emphasize the difference in their status. But clearly that's asking too much these days. The entire dining room had gone quiet now. Conversations at other tables had stopped. All eyes were on table 7, on the well-dressed surgeon towering over the composed waitress, on the confrontation that had long since stopped being about wine and had become something uglier, something everyone recognized, but nobody seemed willing to interrupt. Jade stood her ground, her voice still measured when she spoke. "Is there anything else I can help you with this evening, sir?" That question, delivered with the same professional calm she'd maintained throughout, seemed to be the final straw. Covington's face contorted, his teeth showing in something between a grimace and a snarl. "Help me?" His voice rose loud enough to echo off the high ceilings. "You've done enough helping for one night." The words echoed across the marble floor and bounced off the mahogany walls. Several diners who had been trying to maintain at least a pretense of minding their own business gave up entirely. Heads turned openly now. A couple at table 4 leaned toward each other, whispering behind raised menus. The man in the gray suit at table 11 adjusted his phone slightly, making sure the angle captured both Covington and Jade clearly. A woman near the entrance pulled her own phone from her purse, holding it low against the white tablecloth, but with the camera pointed directly at the confrontation. Jade didn't look at any of them. Her focus stayed on Covington, but something had shifted in the way she held herself. Her spine was a little straighter, her shoulders had settled into a different kind of readiness, one that looked like professional composure on the surface, but carried weight underneath. Her eyes tracked Covington's movements with the kind of precision that suggested she was measuring more than just his mood. She was calculating distance, angles, balance points. Nobody in the room recognized what they were seeing, except possibly Jade herself. Covington noticed none of it. He was too consumed by his own fury, by the fact that this woman, this server, this nobody was still standing there looking at him like he was just another difficult customer instead of someone whose anger should make her crumble. "You're not even going to apologize properly, are you?" he said, his voice tight. "You're just going to stand there with that blank expression like none of this matters." "I've apologized several times, sir," Jade replied quietly. Her tone hadn't changed. It was still professional, still measured, still maddeningly calm. "Not like you mean it." Covington stepped even closer, closing the distance until he was almost directly in front of her. The proximity was aggressive, designed to intimidate, to force some kind of reaction. Jade didn't step back. She simply adjusted her stance slightly, a movement so subtle that most people watching wouldn't even register it had happened. But her weight shifted. Her center of gravity lowered by maybe half an inch. Her hands, still folded in front of her apron, relaxed fractionally. The female investor at table 7 finally stood up, her chair scraping softly against the floor. "Barrett, this has gone far enough. Let's just order something else and move on." Her voice was gentle but firm, the kind of tone someone uses when they're trying to de-escalate without directly challenging. Covington waved her off without looking. "Sit down, Monica. This doesn't concern you." Monica hesitated, glanced at the other investors who were all studying their wine glasses or the ceiling or anything that wasn't the scene unfolding in front of them, then slowly sat back down. The message was clear. Nobody at that table was going to help. More phones appeared around the room. A young couple at table 14 both had their devices out now, recording from slightly different angles. An older gentleman near the back lifted his phone with shaking hands, his face set in disapproval, but his camera pointed steadily at Covington. The restaurant staff, 3 servers and a busboy, had gathered near the kitchen entrance, watching but not moving. The manager was nowhere to be seen, probably still in his office, unaware that his dining room had transformed into a theater with everyone waiting for the next act. "You know what your problem is?" Covington said, his voice dropping to something quieter but somehow more dangerous. "You think you're smart. You think if you just keep that professional mask on, if you just keep saying, 'Yes, sir,' and 'I apologize, sir,' that somehow makes you better than what you actually are." He tilted his head slightly, studying her face like he was looking for cracks in a facade. "But I can see through it. I can see exactly what you're thinking. You're standing there judging me, looking down on me like you have any right to an opinion about someone like me." Jade's expression didn't change, but her eyes did. Just for a fraction of a second, something flickered there. Not anger, not fear. Something colder, something that assessed and categorized and filed away information for later use. It was the look of someone who had been underestimated before and knew exactly how to use that to her advantage. Covington caught that flicker, and it enraged him further. "There it is," he said, his voice rising again. "There's what you really think. You're standing there in your little uniform pretending to be respectful, but you think you're better than me. You actually think you have the right to judge someone who's accomplished more in a month than you will in your entire life." The sommelier took a tentative step forward. "Sir, perhaps we should—" "Stay out of this," Covington snapped, finally breaking eye contact with Jade to glare at the sommelier. "All of you, just stay out of this. This is between me and her." He turned back to Jade, his jaw clenched so tight the muscles stood out against his skin. "I want to hear you say it. I want to hear you actually acknowledge that you made a mistake. Not some corporate apology, not some scripted response. I want to hear you admit that you're wrong, and that I'm right, and that you have absolutely no business questioning anything I say." Jade took a slow breath. Around them, the dining room had gone completely silent. Even the soft, classical music that had been playing in the background seemed to have stopped. Or maybe everyone was just so focused on the confrontation that they couldn't hear anything else. The crystal chandeliers cast their golden light over the scene, making everything look staged, theatrical, unreal. "I understand you feel the service was inadequate, Dr. Covington," Jade said finally. "I can only offer my apology and attempt to correct the situation to your satisfaction." It was the same response she'd been giving, phrased slightly differently but fundamentally identical. Professional, measured, completely unshaken, and it was precisely the wrong thing to say to someone whose ego was already spiraling into rage. Covington's hands curled into fists at his sides. His breathing had quickened. The flush that had started in his face had spread down his neck. "You're mocking me," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "You're standing there mocking me in front of my colleagues, in front of everyone here, and you think there won't be consequences." "I'm not mocking anyone, sir," Jade replied, her voice still calm, but with the slightest edge now, like steel wrapped in silk. "I'm trying to resolve your complaint by making me look like a fool." Covington's voice had risen to a near shout. Several diners flinched. The woman at table 9 grabbed her companion's arm. The man with the gray suit shifted his phone to capture a wider angle. "By standing there with that attitude like nothing I say matters. Like I'm the one being unreasonable when all I wanted was basic competence and respect." Jade's eyes locked onto his, and for just a moment, the professional mask slipped enough to show what was underneath. Not fear, not submission. Something harder and infinitely more controlled. It was the look of someone who had been pushed right up to a line and was deciding, in real time, whether crossing it would be worth the consequences. Covington saw that look and mistook it entirely. He thought he was seeing defiance, rebellion, disrespect that needed to be crushed. He had no idea he was seeing the absolute stillness that comes right before violence, the calm that predators show right before they strike. His body moved before most people in the room even processed what was happening. The shift in his weight became a pivot. His right leg swung up in a wide, brutal arc, his polished black leather shoe cutting through the air with the kind of force that comes from momentum and rage combined. It wasn't a trained strike. It wasn't technical or precise. It was raw aggression channeled into a single violent motion designed to hurt, to humiliate, to prove a point that words hadn't been able to make. The kick aimed directly at Jade's midsection, at her ribs, at the center mass that would guarantee impact and maximum damage. Covington's expensive suit fabric rippled with the force of the movement. His luxury watch caught the chandelier light as his arms swung for balance. His face contorted further, teeth bared, eyes blazing with a mixture of entitlement and fury that had finally found its physical expression. This was dominance. This was putting someone in their place. This was showing everyone in the room that he could do whatever he wanted because nobody had the power or the courage to stop him. The entire dining room seemed to freeze in that split second. Time compressed into something strange and elastic, where a fraction of a moment stretched out long enough for every detail to become impossibly clear. The crystal chandeliers overhead cast their golden light across the scene like stage lighting, illuminating every angle of Covington's attack. The white tablecloths, the polished silverware, the expensive wine glasses, all of it created a backdrop of luxury and refinement that made the violence happening in the center of the frame even more shocking. Monica's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Gerald half rose from his seat, his chair scraping against the marble floor, but he was too far away and too slow to do anything. The other investors sat paralyzed, their faces registering the same dawning realization that their business partner, the celebrated surgeon they'd come here to impress, had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Around the dining room, reactions rippled outward like a stone thrown into still water. The woman at table 9 gasped, the sound cutting through the silence. The man in the gray suit jerked his phone higher, making sure he was capturing everything. The young couple at table 14 both flinched backward in their seats. A server near the kitchen dropped the tray she was holding, the crash of dishes hitting the floor barely registering against the larger drama unfolding. The man, who had been standing near the back, took a full step forward, his mouth opening to shout something, but the words caught in his throat. He was too far away. Everyone was too far away. This was happening too fast, the violence exploding into the refined space with a speed that left no room for intervention. Covington's kick continued its arc, his leg extending fully now, his black leather shoe aimed like a weapon. His height and weight gave the strike power. His rage gave it intent. He wasn't just kicking, he was attacking. He was trying to hurt someone he perceived as helpless, as unable to defend herself, as deserving of punishment for the crime of not collapsing under his verbal assault. The physics of the kick were brutal. The rotation of his hips, the extension of his leg, the angle calculated, however instinctively, to deliver maximum force to a target that stood perfectly still. Jade hadn't moved. She hadn't run. She hadn't even raised her hands to protect herself. To everyone watching, to Covington himself, she looked exactly like what he believed her to be. A powerless victim about to absorb a blow that would leave her crumpled on the pristine marble floor. The moment stretched. Covington's shoe was 3 feet from impact, then 2 feet. The air seemed to compress around the movement, creating a sound like fabric tearing, like something breaking. His face showed no remorse, no second thoughts, only the grim satisfaction of someone who believed he was finally, definitively proving his superiority. More phones lifted around the room, but most people were too shocked to think about recording anymore. They were just watching, frozen in their seats, unable to process what they were seeing. A man in an expensive suit attacking a waitress in the middle of one of the city's finest restaurants. Violence erupting in a space designed to be a sanctuary from anything crude or common. The fundamental wrongness of it paralyzed them, made them witnesses instead of actors. The sommelier stood near the kitchen entrance with both hands pressed against his face. The busboy beside him had gone pale. Another server, a young woman who had been watching the confrontation build from the beginning, had tears streaming down her face but couldn't look away. The manager's office door remained closed. Nobody had thought to get him. Nobody had moved fast enough. Everything had escalated too quickly. Jade's expression hadn't changed. Even with the kick a foot away, even with violence aimed directly at her body, her face remained calm. But her eyes had shifted. They weren't tracking Covington's face anymore. They were locked onto his leg, following the trajectory with the kind of focus that suggested calculation rather than fear. Her weight had already shifted before the kick began, her body preparing for something everyone else assumed was impossible. Covington's shoe was 6 inches from impact. The expensive leather gleamed under the chandelier light. The force behind it was enough to crack ribs, to drive the air from lungs, and to send someone crashing backward into tables and chairs. It was the kind of blow that could seriously injure, and Covington had thrown it with the full intention of causing exactly that kind of damage. 4 inches. The room held its breath. Every eye was locked on the collision point, on the moment of impact that everyone assumed would end with Jade on the floor, hurt and humiliated, with Covington standing over her in triumph. The phones captured it all. The shocked faces, the frozen servers, the luxury setting, the violence. 2 inches. Something flickered across Jade's face. Not fear, not surprise. Something closer to resignation, like she'd hoped to avoid this exact scenario, but had always known it might come. Her hands began to move, rising from where they'd been folded in front of her apron. The movement was small, controlled, economical. To most people watching, it looked like a futile attempt to protect herself. Too little and too late. 1 inch. Covington's smile started to form, a cruel twist of his lips that anticipated victory. He'd made his point. He'd shown everyone what happened when someone forgot their place. He'd proven that his power wasn't just financial or social, but physical too. He'd demonstrated that he could do whatever he wanted, to whoever he wanted, and face no consequences because people like him never did. The kick reached its target and met nothing but air. Jade's body moved in a way that seemed impossible for someone who'd been standing perfectly still a fraction of a second before. Her torso rotated, her hips pivoting with the kind of precision that comes from thousands of hours of training. Her left forearm came up in a tight, controlled motion, angled perfectly to intercept Covington's shin rather than his foot. The impact when they connected was sharp and solid, the sound of bone meeting bone echoing across the dining room like a gunshot. The block wasn't gentle. It wasn't defensive in the passive sense. Jade's forearm struck Covington's shin with enough force to stop the kick's momentum completely, to redirect all that kinetic energy back through his leg and into his own body. The collision sent a visible shockwave through his entire frame. His eyes went wide. His mouth opened in surprise and pain. The cruel smile that had been forming vanished instantly, replaced by confusion that bordered on panic. But Jade wasn't finished. The block transitioned into something else with fluid, economical motion that suggested the two movements were really one continuous action. Her right hand, which had been rising as if to protect her face, changed trajectory mid-movement. Her palm opened, fingers together, thumb tucked. Her elbow pulled back slightly, generating torque through her shoulder and back. Then her hand shot forward in a straight line, the heel of her palm aimed with surgical precision at the center of Covington's chest. The strike looked simple, almost gentle compared to the violence of his kick, but the technique was perfect. Her weight transferred from her back foot to her front foot at the exact moment of impact, driving her entire body weight behind the palm strike. Her hips rotated, her shoulder extended, every muscle in her core engaged in perfect sequence, creating a kinetic chain that delivered maximum force through the smallest contact point. The heel of Jade's palm connected with Covington's sternum exactly where his expensive suit's top button sat. The impact was a dull thud that somehow seemed louder than the earlier collision of forearm and shin. Covington's forward momentum stopped instantly. His body froze for a fraction of a second, suspended in that moment between moving and falling, between attacking and defeated. Then physics took over. Covington's upper body snapped backward. His arms flew out to the sides, grasping at air. His polished shoe, which had been extended in the kick, came down hard on the marble floor as he tried to regain balance. His other foot slipped. His expensive suit jacket flapped open. The luxury watch on his wrist caught the chandelier light one more time as his arms windmilled uselessly. His face cycled through emotions too quickly to catalogue. Shock, pain, disbelief, fear. The realization that he'd miscalculated catastrophically, that the helpless victim he'd been attacking was something else entirely, something dangerous, something he should never have touched. Covington stumbled backward 3 steps, his legs tangling with each other, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He collided with table 7, his hip catching the edge. The table rocked. Wine glasses tipped. One fell, red wine spreading across the white linen like blood. Monica jumped from her seat, pressing herself against the wall. Gerald's mouth hung open, his wire-rimmed glasses slipping down his nose. Covington tried to catch himself on the table, but his hands found no purchase. His legs gave out completely. He went down hard, his knees hitting the marble floor first with a crack that made several diners wince, then his palms. Then, finally, His full weight collapsed forward, and he ended up on all fours beneath the table, gasping for air, his perfectly styled hair hanging loose over his forehead, his face the color of raw meat. The entire sequence, from the moment his kick reached Jade to the moment he hit the floor, had taken perhaps 3 seconds. 3 seconds for the entire dynamic of the room to shift. 3 seconds for every assumption to be proven wrong. 3 seconds for the powerful to become powerless and the helpless to reveal they were anything but. Jade stood exactly where she'd been standing when the confrontation began. Her posture had returned to neutral, her hands lowered slowly back to a relaxed position at her sides. Her breathing remained controlled and steady. The only visible signs that anything had happened were the slight redness on her forearm where she'd blocked the kick and a single strand of hair that had come loose from her perfect bun. Her face showed no triumph, no satisfaction, no emotion whatsoever except perhaps a trace of resignation, like someone who'd been forced to reveal a secret they'd preferred to keep hidden. She looked down at Covington, struggling to breathe on the floor, and her expression remained professional, concerned even, as if he were simply a guest who'd had too much wine and taken a fall. The dining room existed in a state of complete suspended animation. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody even seemed to breathe. The crystal chandeliers cast their golden light over a scene that had transformed from elegant dining to something none of them could quite process. Their brains struggled to reconcile what they'd just witnessed with everything they thought they knew about the world. The man in the gray suit still held his phone up, recording, but his hand had gone slack. The young couple at table 14 sat frozen with their mouths open. The woman at table 9 had both hands pressed against her chest. The server near the kitchen had stopped crying, her face blank with shock. The sommelier had backed up until he was pressed against the wall, staring at Jade like he was seeing her for the first time. Monica looked from Covington to Jade and back again, her face cycling through confusion, horror, and something that might have been respect. Gerald had finally taken his glasses off, cleaning them with shaking hands as if that might help him understand what he'd just seen. The other investors sat completely still, none of them making any move to help their business partner who was still on his hands and knees, wheezing. Jade took one small step back, creating distance, her hands visible and open at her sides. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet, but carried clearly across the silent room. I defended myself. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Simple, factual, undeniable. Covington had attacked. She had responded. Everything that happened next would flow from that basic truth, captured on a dozen phones from a dozen angles, witnessed by dozens of people who would never be able to claim they hadn't seen exactly what occurred. Covington lifted his head slightly, his face contorted with pain and something else. Humiliation. The crushing realization that he'd been wrong about everything, that his assumptions about power and helplessness had just been shattered in the most public way possible, that his life, his career, his carefully constructed image had all just come crashing down in 3 seconds of miscalculation. Covington tried to push himself up. His arms shook with the effort. His breath came in short, painful gasps that suggested the palm strike had done more damage than just knocking him down. He got one knee under him, then his hand slipped on the marble floor, still slick from the spilled wine. His body tilted sideways and he crashed into table 7 with his full weight. The impact sent everything on the table into chaos. Wine glasses toppled and shattered. Plates slid and collided with each other, the expensive china cracking and splitting. Silverware scattered across the white linen, clattering against wood and crystal. The centerpiece, an elaborate arrangement of white orchids in a crystal vase, tipped over and rolled off the edge, water pooling across the tablecloth and dripping onto the floor. Covington's body sprawled across the wreckage, his navy suit soaking up red wine, his face pressed against the ruined linen, his breath fogging the fabric with each labored exhale. The sound of destruction echoed through the dining room, and then stopped. What followed was a silence so complete it felt physical, like pressure building in everyone's ears. Nobody coughed. Nobody shifted in their seats. Nobody whispered. The background music had stopped at some point. Or maybe it was still playing, and nobody could hear it over the ringing absence of sound that filled the space where conversation and dining and normalcy used to be. Jade stood motionless, her hands still at her sides, watching but not approaching. Her expression remained neutral, professional, as if she were simply waiting for instruction on how to proceed with a situation that had moved far beyond standard service protocols. The strand of hair that had come loose from her bun moved slightly in the air conditioning current. That was the only thing in the entire room that moved. Then, slowly, phones lifted, not discreetly anymore, not hidden against tablecloths or angled subtly from purses, openly, deliberately, held high to capture the scene in its entirety. The man in the gray suit stood up for a better angle, his phone held at arm's length, recording Covington's sprawled form across the ruined table. The young couple at table 14 both had their devices out, filming from different positions. The woman at table 9 held her phone vertically, making sure she captured the full height of the chandeliers down to the marble floor where wine and water were spreading in a dark pool. More phones appeared. A businessman near the back. 2 women at table 6. An older couple who had been sitting quietly throughout the entire confrontation suddenly had matching devices out, recording in tandem. Even some of Covington's own dinner guests had pulled out their phones. Monica held hers low, almost apologetically, but the camera was pointed directly at the wreckage. A younger investor at the far end of the table filmed openly, his face set in something between horror and fascination. The servers near the kitchen entrance all had their phones out now. The young woman who had been crying was recording with steady hands, her tears still wet on her face, but her grip on the device firm and purposeful. The busboy beside her held his phone high, making sure he caught everything. Even the sommelier, pressed against the wall, had his device out, documenting the scene with the careful framing of someone who understood they were witnessing something historic. Nobody tried to help Covington. Nobody moved to check if he was injured. Nobody called out to ask if he was okay. They just recorded, captured, documented. The phones created a ring of witnesses, a circle of judgment, transforming the dining room into a courtroom where the verdict was being rendered in real time through dozens of camera lenses. Covington stirred slightly, a low groan escaping his throat. His hand moved, fingers grasping at the soaked tablecloth, trying to find purchase. He managed to turn his head to the side, his face visible now, his expression a mixture of pain and dawning comprehension. His eyes, unfocused at first, began to track across the room. They landed on the first phone, then the second, then swept across the entire dining room and registered the full scale of what was happening. Every phone, every angle, every witness, all of it pointed at him, all of it capturing his defeat, his humiliation, his complete and utter failure. The reality of it settled over his features like a physical weight. His mouth opened and closed. His eyes went wide. The flush that had colored his face during his rage drained away, leaving him pale and clammy. He tried to speak, but only managed a weak sound that might have been a word, or might have been just air escaping. His hand reached toward his dinner companions, a gesture that could have been asking for help, or trying to block the cameras, or simply grasping at anything familiar. None of them moved. They just sat there with their phones out, recording their business partner's destruction with the same passive observation they'd shown during his attack. Gerald adjusted his glasses and kept filming. Monica's hand stayed steady on her device. The other investors maintained their positions, their cameras pointed unwaveringly at the scene. Whatever professional relationship they'd had with Covington, whatever business they'd come here to discuss, was finished. They weren't his colleagues anymore. They were witnesses to his downfall, and they were making sure everyone would know they'd been on the right side when it mattered. The dining room's elegance had transformed into something else entirely. The crystal chandeliers still cast their golden light, but now they illuminated a crime scene. The white linen tablecloths, the polished marble floors, the expensive wine now spreading in dark stains, all of it became evidence. The opulence that had made the Grand Imperial a symbol of refinement now served as the backdrop for a very public demonstration of how quickly power could be stripped away. A phone near the entrance captured Jade's calm expression. Another recorded Covington's sprawled form. A third panned slowly across the entire room, documenting every shocked face, every raised device, every detail of the scene. The footage would be redundant, overlapping, showing the same moment from dozens of perspectives. But that was the point. There would be no ambiguity, no room for alternative narratives, no way for anyone to claim things happened differently than they had. Covington finally managed to push himself up slightly, getting one elbow beneath him. His expensive suit was ruined, soaked with wine and water, the fabric clinging to his body in dark patches. His perfectly styled hair hung in his face. His beard, so meticulously trimmed, now looked disheveled and pathetic. The watch on his wrist, still gleaming, seemed to mock him. A symbol of wealth and status that meant nothing now. That couldn't protect him. That had never been real power at all. His eyes found Jade again. She stood exactly where she'd been, still calm, still professional, still completely in control. The contrast between them was absolute and undeniable. He was on the floor, broken and defeated. She was standing, composed and untouched. The phones captured that contrast from every angle, creating a visual record that would tell the story more clearly than any words could. Covington's mouth worked silently. His face cycled through emotions, confusion, denial, anger trying to resurface but finding no fuel, and finally, slowly, the crushing weight of understanding. He'd lost. Not just the fight. Everything. His reputation, his career, his carefully constructed image as someone powerful and untouchable. All of it was gone, recorded from a dozen angles, ready to be shared with the world. The silence held. The phones kept recording, and Jade simply waited, professional and patient, for whatever came next. The manager's office door finally opened. Alec Craig appeared in the doorway, his expression suggesting he'd heard noise but hadn't understood the scale of what had occurred. He was in his early 50s, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, his graying hair combed precisely. He took 3 steps into the dining room before he registered the scene. His stride faltered. His eyes moved from the phones to Covington, sprawled across the ruined table, to Jade standing calmly nearby, to the absolute silence that filled his normally bustling restaurant. What happened here? His voice came out uncertain, as if he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. Jade turned toward him, her posture straightening slightly. "Mr. Craig?" Her voice carried clearly across the silent room. "Dr. Covington became upset about his wine service. The situation escalated. He assaulted me. I defended myself." The words were simple, factual, delivered without emotion or embellishment, just the sequence of events, stripped to their essential components. Around the room, the phones captured her statement, recording not just the words, but the calm, professional manner in which she delivered them. No hysteria, no exaggeration, just truth, spoken plainly by someone who had nothing to hide. Alec Craig's face went pale. His eyes moved to Covington, who had managed to push himself into a sitting position against the table leg, his breathing still labored, his suit ruined, his face a mask of pain and humiliation. "Dr. Covington, is this true?" Covington opened his mouth, but no words came out. His hand moved vaguely, a gesture that might have been denial or explanation or just confusion. His eyes darted around the room, landing on phone after phone after phone, all pointed at him, all recording his moment of reckoning. The weight of it seemed to crush whatever response he'd been trying to form. Monica stepped forward slightly, her voice quiet but clear. "He kicked her. We all saw it. He attacked her first." She glanced at the other investors, none of whom contradicted her. Gerald nodded slowly, his face grim. The younger investor at the end of the table added, "He was verbally abusive for several minutes before the physical assault." The manager's hand went to his forehead. "Oh, God." He pulled his phone from his pocket with shaking fingers. "I'm calling the police. Nobody leave. Everyone stay exactly where you are." He looked at Jade, concern replacing the shock. "Are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" "I'm fine, sir." Jade's voice remained steady. "Did he hit you? Did he make contact?" "He attempted to kick me. I blocked it and defended myself with a palm strike to his chest. He fell and collided with the table." The clinical description, delivered in the same professional tone she'd used throughout her entire shift, somehow made the situation more real. This wasn't a fight. This wasn't mutual combat. This was a clear-cut assault and an equally clear-cut defense. The phones kept recording, capturing every word, creating an audio record to match the visual one. Alec Craig put his phone to his ear, his voice tight as he spoke to emergency services. "Yes. I need police at the Grand Imperial Dining Room. We've had an assault. The victim is one of our servers. The assailant is still on the premises. Yes, we have multiple witnesses. No, the situation is contained. Please send officers immediately." Covington finally found his voice. "Wait." The word came out raspy, weak. "Wait, this isn't what it looks like." He tried to stand, using the table for support, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. He sagged back down, one hand pressed against his chest where Jade's strike had landed. I was just... The service was completely unacceptable and You kicked her." Monica's voice cut through his stammering. "Barrett, you physically attacked her in front of everyone here. There's no talking your way out of this." "I was provoked," Covington said, his voice rising with desperation. She was disrespectful. She wouldn't acknowledge her mistake. She kept looking at me like she was judging me. His eyes swept the room, looking for support, for understanding, for anyone who would take his side. He found only cameras and cold stares. "You all saw how she was acting. You saw her attitude." Gerald spoke up, his voice flat. "What we saw was you verbally abusing her for 10 minutes and then physically attacking her when she remained professional." "Professional?" Covington's laugh was bitter and slightly manic. "She was mocking me. She was standing there mocking me with that look on her face and that tone in her voice. I was defending my dignity. I was standing up for basic respect. By kicking her." The younger investor shook his head. "Barrett, what were you thinking?" "What was I thinking?" Covington's expression shifted, cycling through denial and anger before landing on something worse. Realization. Slowly, terribly, the full scope of what he'd done settled over him. His eyes moved from face to face, seeing judgment in every one. His gaze dropped to the phones, to the dozens of devices that had recorded his attack, his defeat, his complete loss of control. "The video," he whispered. "Oh God, the video." "Multiple videos," the man in the gray suit said quietly from across the room. "From multiple angles, all showing exactly what happened." Covington's face crumbled. His hand went to his mouth. "My practice, my reputation. I have a medical license. I have patients. I have—" He looked at his investors, seeing their faces closed off, their body language already distancing themselves from him. "The board, the hospital, when they see this—" "Your career is over." Monica said it without malice, just stating a fact. "You attacked someone in public. It's recorded. It'll be viral by morning. The medical board will see it. Your patients will see it. Everyone will see it." She slipped her phone into her purse. "I'm withdrawing from the investment. I suggest everyone else do the same." The other investors nodded. Gerald stood up slowly. "I'm sorry, Barrett, but she's right. We can't be associated with this." One by one, they began gathering their belongings, putting distance between themselves and their former business partner. Covington watched them leave, his face slack with shock. "Wait, please. This was a misunderstanding. We can explain it. We can control the narrative." "There is no narrative to control," Alec Craig said, his voice hard. "You assaulted my employee, in my restaurant, in front of dozens of witnesses with cameras. The only thing to explain is how someone of your supposed intelligence could be that phenomenally stupid." Sirens became audible in the distance, growing louder. The sound seemed to physically affect Covington. He slumped further, his hand still pressed against his chest, his breathing shallow. "I'm ruined," he whispered to no one in particular. "Completely ruined." Jade remained standing where she'd been throughout the entire exchange, her hands at her sides, her expression neutral. She didn't look triumphant or satisfied. She looked like someone who'd done an unpleasant but necessary job and was waiting for the formal conclusion. Professional to the end, even after everything that had happened. The sirens grew louder. Through the restaurant's front windows, blue and red lights became visible, painting the elegant interior with rotating colors that turned luxury into crime scene. The phones kept recording. The witnesses kept watching. And Covington sat among the wreckage of his life, understanding finally, and far too late exactly, what his entitlement had cost him. The police arrived in pairs. 2 uniformed officers entered first, their expressions professional and alert as they took in the scene. The destroyed table, the man sitting among the wreckage, the woman standing calmly a few feet away, the circle of diners holding phones. One officer approached Alec Craig while the other moved toward Jade, his hand resting casually on his belt, but his posture non-threatening. "Ma'am, are you the victim?" His voice was calm, trained for de-escalation. "Yes, officer." Jade's response was immediate and clear. "My name is Jade Chanthara. I'm a server here. That man, Dr. Barrett Covington, verbally abused me and then physically attacked me with a high kick. I blocked the attack and defended myself with a palm strike. He fell and collided with the table." The officer pulled out a notepad. "Did you sustain any injuries?" "Minor bruising on my forearm from the block. Nothing requiring medical attention." "And the assailant?" "He appears to have difficulty breathing. The strike landed on his chest. He may need to be checked out." The officer nodded, making notes. His partner had moved to Covington, asking questions in a low voice. Covington's responses were barely audible, his voice weak and defeated. 2 more officers entered, followed by paramedics carrying equipment. The dining room had transformed into an official investigation scene, the elegant atmosphere completely shattered by the presence of emergency services and official questioning. We have witnesses, Alec Craig said, gesturing around the room. Dozens of them. And video. Everyone recorded what happened. The first officer's eyebrows rose slightly. Everyone. Multiple angles, the man in the gray suit confirmed. I can send you my footage right now if you need it. Around the room, other diners nodded, holding up their phones. The officer looked at his partner, something passing between them. A recognition that this wasn't going to be a complicated he-said-she-said situation. This was going to be one of the most thoroughly documented assaults they'd ever investigated. We'll need statements from all witnesses. And yes, we'll need copies of all video footage. He turned back to Jade. Ma'am, can you walk me through exactly what happened from the beginning? Jade recounted the evening in the same clear, factual manner she'd used with Alec Craig. The wine complaint, the escalating verbal abuse, the racist and classist comments, the physical attack, her defensive response. The officers took detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions, their expressions growing progressively more grim as the full picture emerged. The paramedics checked Covington, taking his vitals, asking about pain levels. One of them looked at the officers. Possible fractured sternum. No immediate life threat, but he needs to be transported for x-rays and observation. They loaded him onto a stretcher despite his weak protests. As they wheeled him past Jade toward the exit, Covington turned his head to look at her one final time. His expression was hollow, defeated, the face of someone who understood exactly how completely his world had collapsed. Jade met his eyes with the same calm professionalism she'd maintained throughout the entire ordeal. She didn't gloat, didn't speak, just watched as he was wheeled away, out of the dining room, out of his position of power, into a future that would be defined entirely by this one catastrophic decision. The investigation continued for another hour. Statements taken. Video footage collected and catalogued. Contact information recorded. The officers conferred in low voices, reviewing the evidence, but their conclusion seemed foregone. One of them approached Jade as the evening finally wound down. Ms. Chanthara, based on witness statements and video evidence, it's clear you acted in self-defense. You're free to go. We'll be filing assault charges against Dr. Covington. You'll likely need to provide additional testimony, but for tonight, you're done. Jade nodded. Thank you, officer. Alec Craig approached as the police finished their work. Jade, take the rest of the week off. Paid. You shouldn't have to deal with any of this. I'm so sorry this happened in my restaurant. He paused, his expression pained. I should have intervened sooner. I should have been out here. You couldn't have known it would escalate like this, Jade said quietly. Nobody could have. By the time the restaurant finally emptied, it was past midnight. The dining room looked like a war zone. One destroyed table, wine stains on marble, broken china scattered across white linen. The elegant space would need hours of cleaning before it could host another dinner service. But the physical damage was nothing compared to the digital storm that was already beginning. The videos had started uploading before Jade even left the building. The man in the gray suit posted his footage to Twitter with a simple caption, "Celebrity surgeon attacks waitress at high-end restaurant. She was ready." The young couple uploaded their version to TikTok. Monica's video went to her private Instagram, then spread as her followers shared it publicly. Every angle, every perspective, all of them showing the same sequence. Covington's rage, his attack, Jade's perfect defense, his complete defeat. By 2 a.m, the hashtag #ViperWaitress was trending. Someone had identified Jade through the restaurant's website, discovered her background as a Muay Thai fighter, found her gym's Instagram page showing her training photos. The narrative wrote itself. Wealthy, arrogant surgeon attacks skilled fighter disguised as helpless waitress. Justice served in 3 seconds. The story had everything. Class conflict. Dramatic reversal. Clear video evidence. Satisfying conclusion. By sunrise, the videos had millions of views. News outlets picked up the story. Surgeon attacks server, gets instant karma, ran one headline. When entitlement meets Muay Thai, read another. Covington's professional profile photos appeared beside screenshots from the video. The contrast between his polished image and his defeated form on the restaurant floor, impossible to ignore. His practice's phone lines were flooded. His website crashed from traffic. Patients canceled appointments. The hospital where he had privileges launched an immediate investigation. The state medical board issued a statement by mid-morning. We are aware of the incident involving Dr. Barrett Chase Covington. An emergency review of his medical license has been initiated. Dr. Covington has been placed on immediate suspension pending investigation. The formal charges followed hours later. Assault, battery, possible hate crime enhancements given the racial and classist nature of his verbal abuse before the attack. Jade's phone rang constantly, but she didn't answer. She stayed home, resting her bruised forearm, watching the story unfold on screens while remaining apart from it. Interview requests poured in, morning shows, podcasts, documentary filmmakers. Everyone wanted her story, wanted her to explain how it felt to defeat her attacker, wanted her to be their symbol of resistance against powerful abusers. She declined them all. Through Alec Craig, she released a single brief statement. I defended myself against an unprovoked attack. I'm grateful the truth is clear, and I can move forward. I hope this reminds people that everyone deserves respect regardless of their position or profession. That was it. No interviews, no victory laps, no capitalizing on viral fame, just dignity and a quiet return to her life, which somehow made her even more compelling to the millions following the story. She became exactly what the moment needed. Not a hero seeking attention, not a victim seeking sympathy, just someone who had drawn a line, defended it when necessary, and refused to let anyone reduce her to either her job or her fighting skills. The Grand Imperial reopened 3 days later. Jade returned to work, moving through the dining room with the same professional grace, serving tables, taking orders, maintaining the standards that had made her one of their best servers. Diners recognized her. Some asked for her section specifically. Others tried to engage her about the incident. She remained polite but firm, redirecting conversations back to their meals, refusing to let that one night define her entire existence. Dr. Barrett Chase Covington's career ended in the wreckage of Table 7. His license was revoked. His practice closed. His reputation became a cautionary tale about entitlement and violence. The video would follow him forever, a permanent record of his worst moment, accessible to anyone with an internet connection. Jade Chanthara simply continued living, working, training, being exactly who she'd always been. Someone who carried quiet strength, demanded respect through competence rather than confrontation, and proved that power has nothing to do with status and everything to do with knowing who you are and refusing to accept anything less from others. The golden chandeliers kept casting their light over the Grand Imperial's dining room, but the room itself had changed. Servers stood a little straighter. Diners spoke a little more respectfully. Everyone who entered carried the knowledge of what had happened there, of the invisible line that existed between authority and abuse, and of the woman who had made that line visible for 3 perfect seconds, captured from a dozen angles and shared with the world. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this incredible journey. If this story touched your heart, wait until you see what's coming next. It's even more powerful and inspiring than you can imagine. So don't go anywhere. Click on that video showing on your screen right now to dive into another amazing story that will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, you won't regret it.